Hello everyone, my name is Farhad Hussain Masoom. I just spoke with Ann Druyan. I will introduce her in a little bit in the main video. We have been emailing back and forth for the last few months, and I just got the chance to do a video chat with her. And as soon as I started the meeting, she just started talking about this video I made. It's a Cosmos introduction or opening scenes remake. So I went there in Monterey Bay, California and made this video, and she just started talking about it before I even started recording. Her first word will be introduction in the recorded video, and enjoy. Thank you so much.
Introduction to the original Cosmos theory is a personal voyage, and I was deeply touched by it. I felt all the admiration and the love that went into it, and so I thought it was lovely.
Thank you so much. For everyone who are living under the rocks for the last 30-40 years, let me introduce you to Carl Sagan's wife, Ann Druyan, who is a winner of many awards, including Primetime Emmy, Richard Dawkins Award, and the Writers Guild Award, the showrunner of Cosmos, Spacetime Odyssey, and Cosmos Possible Worlds, and author of many books, and co-author of Carl Sagan in few of his books. My name is Farhad Masoom. I'm an energy systems analyst at the Argonne National Lab. I work on climate change and energy generation, renewable energy. Climate change is something also Carl Sagan worked on for his PhD thesis.
It was actually the atmosphere of Venus. And, yes. Of course, he was the first person not only to know the temperature of Venus, but also to understand that its intense heat was the result of a runaway greenhouse effect, which of course has such profound implications for us on Earth. And Carl tumbled to that instantly and spent the rest of his life campaigning for people to be aware of climate change.
Yes. Thanks so much for saying that. I dedicated a good section of my PhD thesis, this acknowledgement section, to Carl Sagan, because he introduced me to the beauty of science and the importance of popularizing science.
Yes, critical for anyone who has aspirations of having a democratic society. It can't happen in a civilization so dependent on science and high technology without that precious information that humans over generations have wrested from nature available to each and every one of us. That's the idea.
I love that idea. I wanted to talk to you about how to acquire the translation rights of some of his books to translate into Bangla. I do have a publisher, and he is very interested, and he was quite happy when he learned that I finally got in touch with you, and finally things are in motion. So I also have a few questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm saying you understand. Go ahead, please.
Now, I also have a few questions for you, so I was trying to ask you that which one do you want to do first? Should I go, because I have billions and billions of questions, but we only have 1 hour. So do we go through those questions first, or do we talk about the translation rights first? Which one do you want to do first?
I think we should go through the questions, and you have our office's email address for the translation rights. I'm very excited not only to have a translation in Bangla, but also because Bangladesh is one of the places that is suffering the effects of climate change more intensely than much of the rest of the world. And we will catch up with Bangladesh in not too long. But I think it's a great idea. But that should be done offline with our office. You're already in touch with them, and they can give you a very simple form that we ask everyone who's seeking rights to fill out, and we'll take it from there. But please know that this is something I very much want to happen.
Yeah, the climate change in Bangladesh, the combination of having a very high population density, the rate of deforestation, and just the fact that we have about 5 to 6% of actual forest cover, where the requirement should be above 25%, and the elevation of land makes it very difficult because of the threat of sea level rise.
Sea level, right? Yeah. So please, we'll work on that offline. Let's get to questions.
Thank you. So these questions are from me and from my friends. When I posted in Facebook that I'm speaking with Ann Druyan, many of them jumped in and added their questions as well. And I selected about 10 to 12 questions that I thought would be very interesting because I did not get those answers anywhere else.
Fire away.
Okay, thank you. The first question is those little quotes on top of each of the chapters on your book. Did Carl and you use those off the top of your head, or did you actually wrote the chapter, researched what quote fits in, and then used it?
Something in between, and that is we were both love to read, and Carl could finish an entire book, and I mean a substantial book, in a single night's reading. So, and he and I, as we wrote with Steve Soder in the original Cosmos series, we envisioned the number of books on a shelf that one can hope to read in their whole lifetime. And even for someone like Carl, who was such a prodigious reader, it's not very many books. And so what we would do is we would be reading, and he would come to a quote that was particularly meaningful for him. Or sometimes I would, and he would dictate the quote, the source, into his dictation machine. He always had two small dictation machines with him at all times. Generally one for the scientific papers and the other for articles, books, ideas for talks, things like that. And so he would dictate the citation and the quote into that machine. It would be transcribed by one of the people we work with, and it would go into a special file. And as we were writing, we would dip into the file and find those quotes that were most inspiring. Sometimes the quotes themselves inspired the chapter. That was more rare. But yes, no, but it wasn't as if, we went looking for the quotes after the fact. We already had a tremendous supply of them.
Okay, that's nice. That's kind of what I thought. But those quotes were so relevant, and it sets the tone of that chapter so well. And I always thought that, okay, this is perfect. How did they get them?
Well, that's the thing. One thing that we learned over the years of doing this was how much we have in common with our ancestors, even our ancestors of distant epochs. And that was something thrilling, that connection, even to, our ancestors of thousands of years ago, was still obvious. And so it was thrilling on many different levels. And it was really fun to find that quote that really resonated with what we were thinking currently. Was always very gratifying.
Also, that's something that is really striking, is that I relate with Carl Sagan and you so much that translating those text of the chapters comes easy to me, but translating those quotes in another language and preserve the same feeling, it requires a lot of effort from my end.
Yes, because there's so much nuance. And
let's move to the second question. I always thought that Carl Sagan became more of a family person after he met you. And how did you do that? Like turn his gaze from exorbitant things to the family. On a related note, the title of his book chapters, it went from cosmos, cosmic connection, communication with extraterrestrial intelligence, to Pale Blue Dot, which is about Earth, or The Demon Haunted World, which is about Earth. Like, how much of that was your influence?
I can't say really. I just know that Carl always had the longing to be to be a contributing member of a family. He was a very familial person. And if I did anything, it was that once we were together, there was no boundary between work and play and love and family and happiness. We were constantly thinking together. And the joy of that, the joy of working together became just another means of expression of our love for each other. And so I think that, once we found each other and could be together, he was so happy and I was so happy. And we were able to bring both of our sets of our parents together into our lives so that his parents lived with us for the last year or so of their lives. And my parents bought a house across the road from where I live right now. And so not just his children and our children, but it was also our parents, 3 generations, very close, having dinner together most nights of the week. And in that sense, he became part of the fabric of this larger family. And I think that was what he had always longed for. And it was the fulfillment of that made it possible for him not only to focus on the cosmos, but our part of the cosmos as well. He became, I think, there's no sense in which I gave him a social conscience. He always had a social conscience. He was raised that way and he was born that way. And so I think very proudly of how in 1961 or 2, when he had achieved his doctorate in both physics and astronomy, that one of the first things he did, and remember this is 1960, 61, 64, the great middle of America realized that we were engaged in a struggle for civil rights. But his first thing was to volunteer to teach at the historically all-Black colleges. And he was doing this before a lot of other people in his group had caught on. And he taught a course on this search for intelligent life on Earth, which I think must have been so resonant for the students that he was teaching in those places. He always had a social conscience. He never was blinded by the kinds of sicknesses of racism and misogyny and homophobia, things like that. He was magnificently free of those chauvinisms and those sicknesses. And so I don't think I gave him a social conscience. I don't think that, that it was because of me that he became more engaged in earthly things. I think it was because this great happiness freed him to realize how precious his life, our lives were, and how much he wanted to protect not just his family, but the members of future generations. So it was an evolution.
It's apparent even within those books and the Cosmos TV series. It starts from Shores of the Cosmic Ocean, goes to Lives of Stars, Encyclopedia Galactica, but comes back to Who Speaks for Earth. So
absolutely. And Who Speaks, I want to point out, is Stephen Soder's brilliant phrase, We know who speaks for the nations, who speaks for Earth. And Steve Soter was an astronomer, was our collaborator on the first Cosmos and my collaborator on the second season. And he never gets enough credit because he was, the three of us, we're truly a perfect combination of strengths and together, when I think of the years involved in making the very first Cosmos series and our travel to 60 locations around the world and our late night sessions of writing together, it was a feast of ideas and it was absolutely joyful. And Steve was the voice, that the mind that thought of who speaks for Earth. And I still want to ask that question.
Yeah, I learned that from one of Carl Sagan's biographies. I think it was in K.A. Davidson's once, where this was mentioned. I have a few follow-up questions about what you just said, about your love and family and the social conscience. There's a new movie, Voyagers, which is in the making. And that's for people who don't know, that's about your relationship with Carl. And how involved were you in the script and screenplay? And will somehow 4970 Druyan and 2790 Sagan somehow will make into the movie?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah,
people who don't know about 2709 Sagan and 4970 Druyan, these are two asteroids who are in a perpetually locked in a wedding ring orbit.
Isn't that
please
beautiful?
Go ahead.
That's
beautiful.
A great astronomer, Eleanor Glow Helene. What a great woman. And what a gift that was to be in perpetual wedding ring orbit around the sun. What a mythic, amazing, beautiful gift that is. So, God, I got so carried away about thinking about how lovely that is, that I need you to refresh the question. I'm sorry.
So there's a new movie coming out named Voyagers.
Yes, got it.
How involved were you?
I was completely involved, except we are now having not only a writers' strike of the Writers Guild of America, of which I have been a member since the original Cosmos. So since, I think, 1978. And now we have the SAG-AFTRA strike, the Screen Actors Guild, the Actors Union. And so everything in Hollywood is really come to a standstill. And I love the Writers Guild Union. I totally am for it and for SAG-AFTRA. So yes, I was involved from the very beginning. In fact, I have been developing this project for many, many years, not as long as it took Contact to make it to the screen. That was 17 years. This is more like 7 or 8 years. And I've worked with the director and his screenwriting partner. We've done dozens and dozens of Zooms over the years, going back to the deepest days of the COVID pandemic. And so very much involved. I'm producing and collaborating with the screenwriters and the director as soon as the strike is settled.
Yeah, I hope the writers get their fair share, writing resumes, and the actors' strike gets over as well, so that we can see this initiative. Another question about your relationship is, how did you, as a couple, resolve the differences in opinions? In the epilogue of Billions and Billions, you wrote that the strategy was that may the best argument win.
Absolutely.
Did you never have silly arguments in which there was no way to win?
Of course we did. We were human. So yeah, I mean, could we get annoyed with each other? Absolutely. But we had a really good, especially it got better as time passed, as I became more secure. And what was the ethos was the best, no arguments from authority, as with the methodology of science. And so the best argument has to win. But the best argument couldn't always win because it wasn't always possible for one of us to persuade the other what the best argument was. So instead, we each had one peremptory overrule per chapter. And so we could argue about a word or we could argue about a section. And if we couldn't come to agreement, one of us could say, okay, I'm invoking my peremptory overrule for this word. And then the other would say, okay, that's yours. And we'll write that down, but you can't have any more for that chapter. And that was the release valve. Because, I don't want to, when I talk of the bliss of living with Carl and the joy of it and how we never got over how lucky we were to have found each other. We could never get over the idea that we could stay up as late as we wanted together and, make something to eat at 3:00 in the morning and no one could stop us. We had that childlike thrill of adulthood and of being together. But I don't want to create a false picture because there were times when we argued about silly things. We did have 2 really big arguments during our nearly 20 years together. When I say big arguments, nothing lasted overnight. So, and they were both about American presidents. And, these were, but wow, I mean, I think what's outstanding about us is that we wasted so little of our time together on these things. Were there annoying habits that he had and that I had? Of course. But we kept our eye on the prize. And that was that we knew that life was finite and that every second we had together was precious. And when you're in that situation, you think you can imagine what it would be like when you can no longer reside in this paradise with this other person, when death intervenes, but there's no imagining it. It's impossible to imagine. And, but I have to say, what makes it easier is knowing you gave it everything you had.
It's simultaneously sad and beautiful. Like your statement just now and the epilogue of Billions and Billions, it's creating the same emotions inside me. From that, I was wondering do you have any plans to write a biography on Carl Sagan? You just mentioned that you spent the last 20 years with him. And I think that maybe you can add a little bit more details to his life about his life last 20 years.
And I also want to warn you about the 2 existing biographies. They are filled with inaccuracies, riddled with inaccuracies.
T.A. Davidson and William Poundstone's?
Yes. And I did my best to talk to the authors before they went to press and to point out and make a good argument for why what they were saying was not true. In one case, one of them said to me, it doesn't matter, it's a better story. And at that point, I realized that they were not interested in the same thing I was interested in. So yes, there will be some news about various projects that I have in the coming months, but I'm just not ready to announce them today.
Thank you. I really think that it would be fantastic to have a biography from someone who has lived with him for 20 years.
Yes.
And it would be also lovely to have a full biographical movie on his life, apart from Voyager that is just coming in.
Yes.
In my imagination.
We are doing that with National Geographic. I am producing a documentary on Carl's life.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. So, but again, with everything slightly put off for the time being.
Yeah, I always imagined for the last 10 years, in my imagination, Hugo Weaving plays the role of an adult Carl Sagan.
Interesting casting.
Yeah, thank you. Uh, Follow up on your relationship
Hey,
with
great thought.
Carl.
I hadn't thought of that. Sorry.
He has the voice and the forehead.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the most important thing that you learned from Carl and or Carl learned from you outside of the academic topics? In other words, as
Yes.
a partner.
The thing I learned from Cara was it matters what's true. I actually didn't know that before we fell in love and lived together and knew each other. And it's a very long story, but I have to say that he really gave me a sense of the importance of adhering to reality and the beauty of science as being our best error correcting mechanism for keeping us from lying to ourselves and lying to others. This is something that all humans are vulnerable to. And the fact that we invent something like science or, a Bill of Rights, which is a kind of machine to protect us from the alpha or to protect us from the crushing blow of the state. These are the most precious things that we humans have ever made. And so that's one of the things I learned from Carl. I don't know what he learned from me. I couldn't speak for Carl, but I always felt such tremendous respect from him and such a kind of he listened so carefully to what I had to say, which as a female growing up in the 1950s was in itself a kind of miracle. To be heard and to be taken so seriously and to be given so much credit was tremendous joy. I don't know what he learned from me. I think what we learned together was it was possible to fall deeply, madly in love and to go ever higher and deeper into that love, not to plateau, not to take it for granted, but to be striving always to go higher. That was both an emotional and spiritual experience. And that's something we learned together.
Yeah, so what he learned from you, I think I learned the same from him, and like me, a million others, about the beauty of science or the enormity of the cosmos. And it's beautiful what you learned together as well. It's apparent from your works together. And I always guessed that, but having it confirmed from you is amazing.
He was much more impressive up close. He was, and that's the thing that strikes me and our children, is that, people love him from a distance. But if they had any idea how kind he became, how highly evolved he was, how conscious he was about his courage and his humility. I mean, I just feel like his life was a kind of a work of art because he struck me as being the most fully realized human being. The person who had all these intellectual attainments and yet had such a very profound sense of his responsibility to other people and of his own foibles and failings. I mean, I don't mean to make him into a saint, but, the way he faced his illness and his death and the way he loved us all. I was, last night, I was having dinner in this house with Carl's son, Nick Sagan, and his family. And whenever, I know Nick also lives across the road, so it's a beautiful, it's amazing. And Nick and I are together frequently, and we're always we always inevitably we come around to the idea of how lucky we were to know Carl. And I have that with Sam and Sasha, our children, also that sense of, although Sam tragically was very little when Carl died, but just the amazing beauty of his life.
Yeah, I always wondered what it was like to live in that household with you and Carl. I tell to people that Carl was the father I never had, and
Uh,
I'm sure many people think the same way.
Have you read Sasha Sagan's book? Which is
Yes,
okay. Well, Sasha wrote For Small Creatures Such as We,
such
which
as
is,
we.
yes, and that is her memoir of her childhood in our house. And I
Yes.
think it really conveys with humor and beauty what it was like, and makes me very proud. We had so much fun.
Yeah, I listened to some of her podcasts too,
Oh,
including the one that you did with her couple of months ago.
the one on Voyager,
Hmm.
that was amazing. Or
Yeah,
the one that she did with Daria Robleto and Jennifer Roberts, the last one on Voyager. Oh, between the three of them, they were so brilliant. I wept. It was so beautiful.
um, both of you seem generally optimistic in your works. How do you maintain that optimism, or how do you handle pessimism?
Well, sometimes, like everyone else, I have my moments of pessimism, but I think both of us were born a certain way. I think when we find out how much is nature and how much is nurture, I think nature is going to be a huge part of who we are. Because, when I was a child, my brother told my parents that we shouldn't call her Annie, we should call her Happy or Mary, because she's always so happy. And I was very, almost fatally ill as a child for the first 2 years of my life. But according to my brother and my parents, I was constantly just grinning from ear to ear. And I guess I think I got it from my dad and my grandmother. I don't know, this kind of, even in the hardest of times, when things look really bleak, this excitement about life, which I feel to this very moment. And so I may just be naturally optimistic. Carl had a tremendous optimism. He was optimistic because here's this 11-year-old boy making this drawing that you can see at the Library of Congress or in the third season of Cosmos.
Yes.
Making this drawing, this recruiting poster for an interstellar fleet. This is in the mid-1940s. It's before we have been able to ever launch anything into space, let alone not even to near Earth orbit, let alone escape velocity, to explore the solar system and to be an interstellar traveler, as we've done now. And so he's making this recruiting poster, and he's giving all of the events of the unfolding of our exploration of the cosmos. And the amazing thing is not only have at least half a dozen of them come to pass in just one lifetime, but he was a major experimenter, researcher on every single one of those milestones. So this little boy living in a working class, tiny, kind of dingy apartment, I saw it. It was very modest in Brooklyn, living in a family. The father worked in the garment industry, cutting patterns. Very hand to mouth kind of existence. Never met a scientist, didn't know a scientist. And yet, that this person not only got to fulfill several of his most outlandish, far-fetched, fantastical dreams. That made him optimistic, I think. It also said we humans have a learning curve that is so steep that we can go from our first object launched into space, Sputnik, in 1957, to an interstellar mission in 1977, launched in 1977, only 20 years, let alone landing humans on the moon and safely returning them to Earth. That says that we are capable of a kind of magic, of mythic achievements. And that gives me hope that we will work our way out of the terrible situation that we created for ourselves and other species on this planet. Climate change, the specter of nuclear war, the specter of biological war, all of these demons that haunt us.
So many questions, so many follow-ups about this. My father also worked in a garment industry when I was born. You too?
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw my father bringing in sheets of clothes and then cutting them on our small apartment.
That's what Sam did.
And I too never met a scientist. My father was not even a high school graduate. My mother was a high school graduate. I'm the first one in my extended family to actually go for higher study and get a PhD.
Congratulations. That is so impressive. Of course, Carl was exactly in that same role in his life. I think his parents graduated high school, and I think Sam Sagan had 2 years of university, but that was it. And my father raised his family up from the most grinding poverty, raised everyone up in the family and so heroically. And the amazing thing about my dad is that he did this for his sisters, for his parents, for his children, his wife, but he never had that kind of ugliness that people who are self-made sometimes have. He was totally open-hearted, generous, happy. And so, yeah, that is an achievement.
I'm really happy to hear that. You talked about nature and nurture. I read somewhere, I think in an interview, that Sasha had the same laugh as Rachel.
Yes, yes, yes.
And she had it's not possible because she never learned how Rachel laughed.
Well, and that's the most amazing thing is that, so Rachel, Carl Sagan's phenomenal mother, who I miss to this day, even though she's been gone for 40 something years. So she had a laugh unlike any other. I mean, it was startling. If you were in a room and you heard her laugh, you would turn around and look. And so then 9 months after Rachel's death, Sasha is born. And maybe when she's about a year old or something like that, she suddenly bursts into laughter. And Carl and I are completely covered in goosebumps and astonished to hear that laugh that we thought we'd never hear again. And it's Rachel's laugh in Sasha's. Sasha is laughing like Rachel, like they didn't overlap even a second. How did she know to laugh like that? That's why I say, let's, when we find out really what is nature, I think we'll be shocked.
And just following back to that pessimism versus optimism thing. So at age 10, he calculated that he would not go to Moon or Mars because he would be too old by then and technology would not catch up. So obviously he loved calculations. He wanted to find life somewhere else other than this Earth. Was he sad when he calculated that it's not going to happen in his lifetime?
No, I think he was not sad because he was so fortunate to witness probably more amazing leaps in his lifetime than virtually any other slice of life of time that anyone else before him had had. I mean, think of the radical change from 1934 to 1996. Think of the communications revolution, the space age, the advances in medicine,
World Wide Web.
the fact that we are communicating with each other at the speed of light, and we can see each other and get to know each other without leaving our homes. There's so many things. So no, he wasn't sad. And if you might recall that there's a moving segment in episode 5 of Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, the first Cosmos, where we
Blues
tell
for a Red Planet.
Yes, Blues for a Red Planet. Boy, you know your Cosmos. And we tell the story of Wolf Vishniak, who was Carl's dear friend,
Mhm.
and who died looking for extremophile life forms. And
In Antarctica.
in Antarctica, before we ever were able to get to Mars. And there's a line in there that we say, that science is a generation binding enterprise, a connection of minds reaching back to antiquity. And it's not for any one generation to see the whole picture. But when we see more than what was seen before, we are seeing for the great chain of minds that came before us. I think Carl philosophically really believed that. And I think he felt that generations to come after would be seeing for him. He wouldn't get to see it, but they would be seeing for all of those who came before and who made these great leaps possible.
Mm-hmm. It's also a paraphrase of what Kepler said, and it was mentioned in the 3rd episode of Cosmos, that each generation will have something to cherish.
Yes.
Something to explore and discover.
Yes. Yes. How prescient that was.
Yes, exactly. It's fantastic that Nick lives across from you. I loved his narration of Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, which is probably my favorite book of you and Carl Sagan.
Okay. Of all the books that he wrote or we wrote or he wrote with others, Shadows was his favorite book.
Mine too. It was fascinating, and his narration was actually great. And I was wondering that why did not he narrate his own books, his trilogy, Idlewild, Edenborn, and Everfree?
I'll ask him this weekend. I don't know. And I'm so delighted you asked. I love those books. I'm very proud. God, our children I'm so proud of them all. I don't think back 18 years ago when he was writing them, I don't know if that was an option.
Yeah. Many of them turned out to be authors themselves, which is fantastic. And Nick also wrote many episodes of Star Trek. And,
yes,
and I know that Carl at least saw 2 episodes of Star Trek written by Nick.
I was talking to Nick about this the other night. The joy in this very house. We're watching Nick's episode of Star Trek, and I think it's called Attached. It's very often been chosen as one of the 10 greatest episodes of all the Star Treks. And we're watching it, and Carl turns to me and goes, "This is really good, Annie. This is really good." And I knew the joy that he felt. I mean, he just adored Nick, and he was so proud of him. And Nick is a professor at Ithaca College. And I delight in reading the assessments by his students every term because they are so full of the same kind of love that Carl generated. And I just always imagine what it would be like if Carl could read them.
Unfortunately, Star Trek Voyager came out after his death,
Yes.
just like Contact, and he did not get to see them.
No.
That's sad. So I have a few small questions before I ask you the final questions.
Okay.
It was obvious that he was interested to know that where we came from, right? And our place in the cosmos or the universe. Did he ever go back to his maternal ancestor's place in the village of Sasov in Ukraine?
Sadly, no. And I've been thinking, of course, this last 500 days of this horrendous war, I've been thinking about that a lot. No, he never went to Sasov, and he never got to see it. If he had lived even a little bit longer, I really think that we would have made such a journey. I wanted to go back to Druya, which is not far away. It's now in what is Belarus, which is where my family came from, my dad's family. And I've never been there. Sasha got very close, but not all the way there. No, he never got to do that. But we did go to the apartment in Brooklyn where Carl grew up. And
which one, the Bay 37th Street or the
yes,
Bay Parkway?
Bay 37th Street, and that was a wonderful spring day, and we just stood outside briefly, and you could see the memories washing over Carl of his friendships and childhood, his parents, whom he loved so deeply, and we rang the buzzer, and there was a very nice lady living in his apartment. And I don't think she recognized Carl. It was a very long time ago, but she said we could come up and see the apartment. And so we did. And he was just emotionally overwhelmed by the experience.
Two questions. Did you recreate that in Cosmos
Yes.
Possible Worlds?
Yes, we did. We did with
And
Sasha playing Rachel Sagan. Yeah, that was amazing.
It was really sweet to see that.
Directing that was so much fun.
And the second question is, I could not find the apartment number anywhere.
I do have it written down somewhere, but I can't. I just don't remember it at this moment.
If you let me know privately, that would be great. I don't think they would want any public attention to that. So
Exactly.
even if you let me know, I'm not going to share that publicly.
Thank you.
Another question is that there is a book called The Sagan Conspiracy.
Really? I don't know that book.
And it is very poorly written. And obviously, it's a conspiracy in which he says that the writer says that Sagan wrote an article at some point that there were definitely aliens, and the government tried very hard to suppress it. And I know that is not correct, but since you don't know about it, I don't think there's an official statement.
No. There's
Sagan state about
not only do I not
correct?
know about it, but I think there's one thing I can say with absolute certainty, and that is that Carl was irrepressible. He had no fear of speaking truth to power. He had no fear of saying something would get him in trouble. As I said, for him, all that mattered was that what was true. And there is I can guarantee you, there is no way that Carl actually made some form of contact and kept that from me, let alone the rest of the world. It was against his religion to keep secrets about something so important. And obviously, it just makes perfect sense. If you're a scientist, an astrophysicist, as Carl was, and you actually do make contact, then what could possibly stop you from telling the whole world? That's taking your place in the history of science for something that is so fundamentally important. It's on the level of Copernicus. No, Einstein. Absolutely not. No, that there is absolutely no chance that that's right.
Oh, one name. If Carl Sagan lived and the alien contacted the human species, we would have sent him to coordinate our communication. Who would you send now?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think I would send a single person. I would, because I think that we're human and fallible. And I think we would do it as we did it in the novel Contact. I would send perhaps 5 people. And I would want them to be 5 people from diverse backgrounds who represented a broad spectrum of human experience and expertise. They would not all be scientists. They would not all be physicists or astronomers or cosmologists or astrobiologists. I would send, if I could send 10 people, it would be even better. But for me, there is no one person at this moment who I would trust to do something so critically important.
Thank you. Beautiful answer. So my final question, and then I have a two-folded request. So my final question is, what's next from Ann Druyan? What can we expect in the next few years? At least, is there a possible timeline for a 4th season of Cosmos? I know that you have plans for that. You also talked about writing retroactively a book on Cosmos' Spacetime Odyssey. Is there any update on that?
Well, I can't give you any updates right now because I can't. There are a bunch of announcements that I would love to make, but I don't want to jump the gun and make various the other collaborators and producers and platforms mad at me. But yes, I am working more actively or as actively as I ever have at any time in my life. And there are multiple projects that lie ahead and that seem to, some have already been greenlit and some of them seem to be very promising. So I'm sorry to say I can't do that today, but there's exciting news to come.
Thank you. We are very excited to see what's next from you. We are curious and eager to have the same awe and excitement from everything that you do. And all the best for that. My request is, I want to meet you. How can I make that happen? And I'm an environmental scientist and energy systems analyst, economist. I have a master's in applied economics. I have a PhD in forestry and natural resources.
Wonderful.
Can I be of any help in any of your future projects?
I'm so happy you asked. Let us discuss those offline. Now that we know how to get a hold of each other, I'd be very happy to communicate with you further. And I have to say congratulations to you for all of your achievements. And thank you for being such a wonderful friend to everything that Carl stood for.
Thank you so much. It's just sinking in me right now that I'm talking to you. I have been to places where he was born. I did not know the apartment number, but I was in Bensonhurst.
And you've been to Ithaca. I saw you were at the cemetery.
Yeah, I was in the public library on the Utrecht branch, New York Public Library, Ithaca, University of Cornell. I live in Chicago. So
have you been to Chicago? Oh, Carl always believed that his education at the University of Chicago, and particularly the Maynard Hutchison curriculum of the University of Chicago, which meant that every geologist had to have read the Upanishads. Every scientist had to know Shakespeare, literature, world culture that made him who he was. And he treasured his experience there. He got his undergraduate degrees there and his PhD and his PhDs, I should say. And so he loved Chicago. We went there several times and wandered the places that were really most meaningful to him in his youth. What a great city.
Please let me know when you're here the next time.
Happy to.
I also went to Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center. I did not go to JPL yet, or where he lived in Wisconsin, but it's sinking to me right now that I'm actually talking to the person who he lived with for the last 20 years. And thank you so much for taking the time and effort to make this arrangement. I'm very happy. I cannot express my excitement.
Farhad, it has been my pleasure, and it's so good to meet you. I hope this is the beginning of a continuing friendship, and I have to say thank you so much. I can feel your regard for Carl, and we need more Carls. We need more scientists who want to connect with the public and who want to share their precious knowledge. So I really wish you the best of luck in everything you're doing. So good to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you for everything you do. And I will keep in touch with your office about the translation rights.
Wonderful, Farhad. Best of luck.
Have a nice day.